Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Naram Chaiva Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Devim Tato Jayamudirayet Tato Jayamudirayet. Very good. Welcome back. We'll continue our introductory lectures on the Mahabharata. We just started in the last class the main introduction. We said the text, the Mahabharata, actually has two beginnings. The first beginning in chapter 1, the second in chapter 55, which we're now studying. And in chapter 55, we come to the, I don't know if we can call it main introduction, because we finally get to Vaishampayana, who is the main narrator of the Mahabharata. And he's in discussion, in dialogue with King Janamejaya. Do you remember the story? Vaishampayana goes to Janamejaya's ritual, that Sarpa Satra, the snake sacrifice. And Janamejaya asks Vaishampayana to narrate the story of the Mahabharata, the story that he heard from his guru. Who is Vaishampayana's guru? Vyasa, right? And remember, the context is this ritual will go on for a number of days, and there are certain breaks or intervals during the day when there are no rituals going on. So it's necessary to have some kind of entertainment for all the great brahmanas and guests at the Sarpa Satra. So Vaishampayana is invited to narrate as an entertainment during the breaks in the ritual. And in narrating the story, so King Janamejaya says, please narrate the story of Mahabharata. There's kind of a principle. It's a really elaborate story. So instead of beginning the elaborate narration, he gives a summary narration first. Summary narration means a very brief narration of the story. In fact, most of chapter 55 it's a one-chapter summary of the entire Mahabharata. And that's what we're going to see in just a few minutes, is a very brief summary of the Mahabharata. Why would he do that? Well, I myself might wonder, why would he do that? But I notice that if you go out to a fancy meal, before they serve you the meal, they serve you some, they're called appetizers. Now, that never works for me. If I eat the appetizers, I'll be full and I won't eat the meal. But for a lot of people, the appetizer is intended to increase their appetite or hunger for the meal to come. So we can think of Vaishampayana's one-chapter summary, which we're about to see. Think about it as being an appetizer. In fact, we're going to see later Janamejaya's comment, which makes it clear that it served its purpose as an appetizer. We'll see that, I think, later in the class. So, with that brief introduction, let us jump back in where we left off, which is verse 7. Tams tata rupa viryaujaha, tams tata rupa viryauja, sampanhan paurasammatan, sampanhan paurasam, namrishan kuruvo drishtva, namrishan kuruvo drishtva, Pandavan Shriya Shobhrataha, Pandavan Shriya Shobhrataha. Start at the third line. Kuravaha. Kuravaha is plural, the Kauravas. The Kauravas meaning whom? Duryodhana, etc. So Duryodhana and the others, drishtva, having seen, this is the very beginning of the prior two verses. Let me just set the context with you. The last two verses we saw in the last class, Vaishampayana says, O king, O Janameja, please listen. I'll just read this here. O king, listen to this story about the conflict between the Kurus and Pandavas and the dice game for the kingdom and the banishment to the forest, and also about the war that destroyed the kingdom. I will tell you that which you asked, O king. So those are the previous two verses. So now he begins to narrate the story with verse 7. And the story begins that the Kauravas, Kuravaha, Drishtva, having seen the Pandavas who had what? Shri, Yashas, Bhrita, they were blessed with Shri, wealth, and Yashas, fame. And how do you think the Duryodhana and the Kauravas felt seeing the fame and wealth of their cousins, of the Pandavas? What did they feel? Na amrishan. Sorry. They couldn't bear it. They couldn't stand it. Na amrishan. They couldn't stand seeing the success and glory of their cousins, the Pandavas. Now at the beginning, those who, sampannan, second line, those who were endowed with what? Rupa, virya, ojaha. Rupa, virya, and aujas. Rupa, beauty. Virya, courage and strength. Ojas, energy. And not only that, they were also Paura Sammatan. They were loved and respected by the members of the kingdom. Remember, this is the ruling class, and every ruler wants to be popular, right? So how does our president feel when his ratings go down? And how does he feel when the ratings go up? It has an effect. So the kingdom is being ruled both by the Kauravas and the Pandavas, but the Kauravas see that their cousins, the Pandavas, are not only, they're more beautiful than we. I'll just play with this a little bit. The Kauravas say, you know what, they look better than us, they have more wealth, they have more power, they have more energy, and they're more famous, and they are loved more by all the kingdom. And therefore, na amrashan. The Kauravas couldn't stand it. By the way, mostly we're just going to see a lot of verses today, but this is a good point to show something. The Mahabharata is so brilliant at demonstrating. Of course, the Mahabharata is a story about a war. A war means you have an enemy. And now here is a question, who is the real enemy? Now, definitely we can say the enemy of the Pandavas is the Kauravas. And you might think the enemy of the Kauravas is the Pandavas. Maybe not. Because look at this. The enemy is one who defeats you, or who can defeat you. What is it that defeated the Kauravas in general, and what is it that defeated Duryodhana in particular? This verse hints at it very nicely, because the verse says that Duryodhana na amrashan, he couldn't stand it when he saw the glory and fame and wealth and beauty. What was the emotion Duryodhana felt? In English we call it jealousy. In Sanskrit we call it matsarya. And it's interesting that jealousy or matsarya is one of a traditional list of 6 enemies. You've seen this? I think most of you have seen it. If you haven't, you should see this. So there is a group of 6 enemies called Shad Ari. Adi means enemy. This dot means shud, not sad. Or also ripu. Ripu also means enemy. So there's shud adi or shud ripu. 6 enemies, which include kama, desire, krodha, anger, moha, delusion, mada, infatuation, kama, krodha, moha, actually the usual order, lobha, greed, mada, infatuation, and number 6, the one we're talking about, matsarya. So once again, kama, desire, krodha, anger, moha, wrong thinking, lobha, greed, mada, infatuation. There are other ways of defining these as well. And number 6, matsarya. Significant that they're called enemies. So who is really the enemy? As we just said, the enemy of the Pandavas was the Kauravas. But now who's the enemy of the Kauravas? Who is Duryodhana's enemy? What is the ultimate agent that causes Duryodhana to be defeated? Right? All of these, really speaking, all of these afflict Duryodhana. In fact, all of these afflict each and every one of us. And these are the enemies to being successful in life. Now, and the way that they are enemies is by interesting. They have an interesting strategy. Different enemies have different strategies. So the Pandavas, they were smarter and stronger than the Kauravas. Therefore, they were able to defeat the Kauravas. How were the Kauravas, and especially Duryodhana, defeated by these enemies? How are we defeated by these enemies? These enemies have a really sneaky strategy. What is the sneaky strategy of these enemies? These enemies use us against ourselves. These enemies turn us against ourselves, which is to say, in a more simple way, these enemies cause us to do harmful, self-defeating actions. Bottom line. These enemies are inside of each of us, and it is due to the presence of these enemies that we make major blunders in life. Blunders which end up hurting us as much or more than anyone else. We defeat ourselves. Defeat ourselves means we deprive ourselves of the accomplishments we want in life. We're deprived due to these enemies, not directly, but when these enemies conspire to lead us to make mistakes, to do wrong things. The best example of it is if you're talking to someone and they get you angry or irritated, and then out of your anger and irritation, you say something spiteful to them. When you say something spiteful, does it make the situation better or worse? Invariably, it makes it... And by the way, you knew that beforehand, right? You already knew that if you say the wrong thing, it's going to make a bad situation worse. And then you say it anyway. What? Why? You were forced to by an enemy, an inner enemy, one or more of these 6, conspiring to force you to do the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing which causes you to suffer, which is self-defeating behavior. There's a nice American metaphor. Some of you, I've told this long ago. The nice American expression is shooting yourself in the foot is a good American English expression. You have to visualize where that comes from. You've watched all these cowboy movies, right? So, they have this gun duel. count to 3 and shoot. So the gun is in a holster, got a leather holster. So 1, 2, 3, and then on 3, this fellow reaches for the gun. It's stuck. He's struggling to get it out of the holster. The other guy's getting ready to shoot him. He's struggling to get it out of the holster. It discharges. Where is it pointed? That's right. So he shoots himself in the foot. There's a 2-step process. So number 1 is he's injured himself. And what does the other fellow do? Finishes him off. These are pretty effective enemies, right? So they not only conspire to lead us to harmful self-defeating activity, they then make us vulnerable to being finished off by others. And isn't that exactly what happened to Duryodhana? So this verse is describing his matsarya, or any or all of these 6 inner enemies. These 6 enemies led Duryodhana and the others to engage in self-defeating behavior, such as all their plots to kind of get rid of the Pandavas, leading up to the crooked dice game, etc. We're going to see some of this in today's class. So the matsarya, the jealousy, and all the other inner enemies led Duryodhana and the others to commit wrong actions, self-defeating actions. They were against the Pandavas, but in the end, they ended up being against themselves, the Kauravas. And then second, remember the 2-step. First you shoot yourself in the foot, then the other guy finishes you off. So first the Kauravas shot themselves in the foot by engaging in adharmic activities. And then what did the Pandavas do? Finished them off. Same thing. You shoot yourself in the foot, then you get finished off. This is true for any of us in life. If these inner enemies conspire and cause us to do adharmic actions, there are 2 consequences. One consequence is we will injure ourselves in the process. Second consequence is we then become vulnerable to being further injured by others. This is how these enemies conspire. Okay, just nice to point this out before we continue. All right. Meanwhile, back to the story. Are you in the mood for a good story? Here we go. Tato Duryodhana kruraha, tato Duryodhana karnascha saha saubalaha, karnascha saha sau. Tesham nigraha nirvasan, tesham nigraha vividhans te samacharan, vividhans te sam. Tataha, therefore, thereafter, which means because Duryodhana couldn't stand seeing the success and glory of his cousins, tataha, therefore, Duryodhana, who's described here as being kruraha, the cruel one, and not only Duryodhana, but karnaha cha, also Karna, also saha saubalaha. Saubala is the son of Subala. Subala is the father of Shakuni. So Saubala means Shakuni. Saha Saubala means along with Shakuni. So Duryodhana, along with Karna and Shakuni, what did they do? In the last line, samacharan. They made arrangements. Vividhan, te samacharan. They made various arrangements. Various arrangements for what? Te sham nigraha nirvasam. For the nirvasam means banishment. Nigraha, forcible. Nigraha nirvasam, the forcible banishment, tesham, of them, of the Pandavas. They made, Duryodhana, Karna, and Shakuni, made various plans, plots, strategies to figure out how to forcibly banish the Pandavas from the kingdom. Then what happened? Tata samantra sachivar, tata samantra sachivar, vrishadushasanadibihi, vrasha dushasana dhritarashtramanugnyapya jatusham grihamadishata jatusham griham. Tataha, then, thereafter, Duryodhana, Sammantriya, having consulted with whom? Sachivaihi, with his advisors. Now, here's a problem. You know this problem very well. Suppose your advisors are not as smart as you. In fact, suppose the advisors just can't think straight. Then what kind of advice will you get? By the way, I'll just share with you very quickly. I have this discussion with our teenagers. And what happens is teenagers will very often consult their friends. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? All teenagers do that. But I tell these teenagers, hey, you're smarter than your friends. Why are you asking them for advice? What kind of advice do you think you're going to get from them? You're asking the wrong person for advice. I tell this to our teens. Well, Duryodhana has the same problem. So those that he's asking for advice, I won't say they're not as smart as him, but their minds, American English, their heads aren't screwed on right. They're not thinking properly. So Duryodhana consults his advisors. Who are those advisors? Vrasha Dushasana Adibihi. His advisors, including Dushasana, his younger brother. Well, the younger brother is going to give you good advice. Younger brother is younger than you. And also Vrasha. Vrasha literally means bull, and here it means Karna. So, and Karna had a big ego problem. So we won't get into the complexity of his story. Most of you know the story of Karna, which led him to be an extraordinarily conflicted person. So he's asking advice from conflicted people like Karna, like his little brother Dushasana. What kind of advice will he get? Anyway, this is Duryodhana's problem. So based on the advice he gets, he, along with Shakuni, they come up with this plot to get rid of the Pandavas. The only one problem, they need daddy's permission. Dhritarashtam anugnapya. If you know some Sanskrit, this is a causal gerund, anugnapya. It literally means they make Dhritarashtra agree. They don't ask permission. They force his permission. And Duryodhana has his way of doing it. Many of you have raised children. You know, Duryodhana was the oldest child, which means what? Daddy's favorite. And when daddy's favorite comes, with a really sad, long face and tears and all of this, what does daddy do? Okay, go. So one way or the other, Duryodhana convinced his father Dhritarashtra to agree to this plot. What was the plot? Jatusham griham adishata. Adishata. He gave an order, Duryodhana gave an order to do what? To build a griham, a house built of jatu. Jatu means wax or lac. So he gave the order, many of you know the story very well, so he gave the order to build the house of lac, as it comes in most narrations, the idea being that once they are inside this, not a house, a palace built of flammable materials. What was the idea? The idea that Duryodhana would then torch the house while they were inside to remove the problem. And then what happened? Tatra tan vasayamasa, tatra tan vasaya, pandavan hamitaujasaha, pandavan hamitaujas, Adahayat cha visrabdhan, adahayat cha visrab, pavakena punastada, Tatra, there, in that palace built of lac, means built of wax and other flammable materials. Tan vasayamasa, another causal. Duryodhana tricked them into living there. If I start explaining all the details of this, we'll be here for weeks and weeks and weeks, so with your permission. By the way, we're going to get some of it as we go through the story, but we're going to stay to the spirit of the summary, which is a summary and not an elaborate. Otherwise, to explain all the contrivances by which he convinced the Pandavas to go there, that's a long story. We'll leave that out. So, Tan Vasayamasa. Duryodhana convinced or tricked the Pandavas. Tricked whom? Pandavan, in the same next line. Who are the Pandavas? Amita Aujasaha, the Pandavas who had limitless energy and strength. He convinced them, Tatra Vasayamasa, to live there in that house made of lac. And then what? His plan was Adahayat. His plan was to burn. To burn who? Visrabdhan, the trusting ones, the naive ones, the ones who didn't know what was going on, the ones that were tricked. Visrabdhan means the trusting ones. They didn't know what was going on. And he would burn them how? Pavakena, by setting fire. Punaha tada, by setting fire once again to that house when they were living there, along with their mother, Kunti. They were living there, and the plan was to, once they were living there, to set fire to the home. Fortunately, Virurasyaiva vachanat, Kanitri vihita tataha, Kanitri vihita, Mokshayamasa yogena, Mokshayamasa, Te mukta pradravan bhayat, Te mukta pradravan bhayat. Vidurasya vachanat. Vachanat, by the instructions of whom? Vidura, their kind uncle, their wise uncle. So Vidura, their wise uncle, Vachanat, he gave instructions. What was the instructions? Kanitri vihita tataha. Their instructions were that a tunnel, kana is a hole or a tunnel, Kanitri is the one who digs the tunnel. So a tunnel digger was employed to dig a tunnel from within the house of lac to outside, and in this way, mokshayamasa yogena. Yogena, by this arrangement, Vidura arranged mokshayamasa for the Pandavas to be saved. Here moksha means salvation. Mokshayamasa, he saved the Pandavas. The palace was set on fire, and there was a number of people inside who perished. In fact, a quick detail, there were 5 Pandavas plus mother. They all escaped through the tunnel, but there were 6 others who were inside and got consumed. Six others who were devoted to the Kauravas that lost their lives in that palace, and their dead bodies were discovered, their burnt bodies were discovered, but it was indistinguishable who they were. So therefore, Duryodhana and the Kauravas assumed that they were successful and they had eliminated their competition, as it were. On the other hand, those Pandavas, what did they do? Muktaha. They were freed. They snuck out through the tunnel, and pradravan, and they ran away from that burning building. Bhayat, in fear, they ran through the tunnel and ran out from the burning building. Then, Ata sandhayate vira, ata sandhayate eka chakran vrajanstata, eka chakran vradanstata, brahma rupa dhara bhutva, brahma rupa dhara, matra sahaparantapaha, matra sahaparantapaha. Ata, then, Sandhaya, having been saved, having escaped from the burning palace, te viraha, those heroic Pandavas, what did they do? Tada, then vrajan, they went. They went to a town called Ekachakra. So they went to Ekachakra. How? Brahma Rupa Dhara Bhutva. Bhutva, having become Brahma Rupa Dhara. Dhara means one who wears. One who wears what? Brahma Rupa, the form of a Brahmana. Now remember that these are Kshatriyas. So how do Kshatriyas dress? They dress ready for battle. I don't know what they wore, I have no idea. But anyway, they dress ready for battle. So the Pandavas were dressed as warriors would be dressed. But here, when they went to Ekachakra, now they're in disguise. They want to lead the Kauravas to believe that they perished in the fire. Remember, 6 bodies were there. So they don't want to be discovered, so they go incognito. They take on disguises. What are the disguises? They take off their warrior clothing. They put on white dhotis and white angavastrams. And I don't know if they go through it. Maybe they shave their heads and have the shikha. I don't know how much they did. Anyway, they assume the guise of pious brahmanas. They wear the vibhuti and all of this. And they go to this town, Ekachakra, and this is their disguise. And they go there. Matra saha parantapaha. Parantapaha, those mighty ones. Having assumed the guise of brahmanas, they go there, Matra Saha, along with their mother Kunti. And then, again, when it's just simple story, we'll just go quickly through the verses. Te tatra draupadim labdhva, te tatra draupadim, parisamvatsaroshataha, parisamvatsarosh, viritahastinapuram, viritahas, pratyajagmurarindamaha, pratyajagmurarindamaha. Tatra, there in Ekachakra, where they lived, pari samvatsara ushitaha, where they lived pari samvatsara for about a year. So they lived there in Ekachakram for about a year. And what did they do there? Te Draupadim labdva. They literally acquired Draupadi as their wife. Again, long story. You remember there was a competition for her, an archery competition. Arjuna wins the competition, so Arjuna wins Draupadi's hand in marriage and brings her back home. There's just what a silly story. I have to say, and I don't mean to make fun of the Mahabharata, but look at the essence of the story goes like this. Duryodhana brings her home. She's standing outside, and Arjuna announces to Mother Kunti, "Mom, I just won something." And she says, "That's nice, dear. Share it with your brothers." So, in a very unlikely turn of events, Draupadi becomes wife to all 5 of the Pandavas, which is extremely unlikely, but that's the nature of the story. So Draupadim labdva, having gained in this unlikely sequence of events, having become married to Draupadi, parisamvatsara ushitaha, the Pandavas lived there in Ekachakra for a year. But then, after a year, viditaha, they were recognized. They were found out, these aren't Brahmanas, these are those Pandava brothers who were famous. They were and loved. They were very famous and much loved, so they were discovered. But now having been discovered, now they're worried, what will the Kauravas do? Are they going to send a search party to hunt them down and kill them or something? They don't know. So what they did, what would real warriors do? So they're in Ekachakra. They've been discovered. Are they going to go on the run? They're warriors. What do? They go back and they meet their oppressors. Hastinapuram. So Hastinapuram prati back to Hastinapura. Ajagmuhu. Pratyajagmuhu. Nice verb. They return to Hastinapura to meet Dhritarashtra and the rest of the Kauravas. They return, and who are they? Well, here's our word, Adi. Adi, Arin Damaha. Arindama is one who conquers the foes, one who overcomes the enemy. So those Arindamaha, those conquerors, return to Hastinapura, having been discovered, having been recognized when they were living in Ekachakra. Tahukta dhritarashtrena, tahukta dhritarashtrena, Ragnya Shantanavena cha, Ragnya Shantanave, Asmabhih Khandava praste, Asmabhih Khandava praste, Yushmad Vaso Nuchentitaha, Yushmad Vaso Nuchent. Te Uktaha. We have to break all the sandhis. Those Pandavas were addressed. Addressed by whom? Dhritarashtrena, by King Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtrena, who was Ragnya, who was the king, who was Shantanavena, Shantanava. Shantanu was his father. One who is born of Shantanu is Shantanava. The son of Shantanu is Shantanava. So Shantanavena, by the son of Shantanu, by the king, by Dhritarashtra, te uktaha, they were addressed. The Pandavas were addressed by Dhritarashtra. What did Dhritarashtra say? He said, Asmabhihi anuchintitaha. He says, we've been thinking this over. Anuchintitaha. We've been asmabhihi, by us. I suppose the royal we. So we have been thinking about this. This has been discussed by us. This has been deeply considered asmabhihi, by us, either by the Kauravas in general or the royal we, by us. And what have they decided? Yushmad vasaha, your dwelling place, the place where you will live, Yushmat, your, Vasaha, your dwelling place. Your dwelling place will be where? Khandava Praste. In the Prastha, in the area of our kingdom known as Khandava Prastha. They had been living in Hastinapura. And then basically they are kicked out. Kicked out of their own palace, kicked out of their own kingdom, and sent into exile, really speaking, sent into exile in this Khandava Prastha, which is described in the Mahabharata as being a really barren backwoods, which means remote, inaccessible place with very poor land, with no buildings. There's nothing there. They just said, go. And this is Dhritarashtra's arrangement. There was a lot of debate going on. And again, the story is very elaborate. The elaborate story it's debated for days and days with Bhishma. with Vidura. I think Vyasa even comes at some point in this debate, and they're arguing and deciding and how to handle this. So their general idea was okay. The general thought was, let's divide the kingdom into two. One half of the kingdom is half of the kingdom that's centered around Hastinapur. The other half of the kingdom is a part of the kingdom centered around Khandava Prastha. And it seems like an equitable arrangement, except that the half that's given to the Pandavas is useless. It's dry, barren land. It's 50%, but it's 50% of a barren land. So it's not exactly an equitable arrangement, but that is the arrangement that's made by Dhritarashtra, their uncle. Remember, the Pandavas' father has died by this point, so we're not seeing all the details in the story. Their father, Pandu, has died, and therefore Dhritarashtra is their elder uncle, and they take instructions from their elder uncle, Dhritarashtra, and they leave. Tatra te nyavasan rajan, tatra te nyavasan Samvatsaraganan bahun, samvatsaragana vashe shastra pratapena, vashe shastra pratap kurvanto nyan mahikshataha, kurvanto nyan Tatra, there, in Khandava Prastha, Tatra, there, in their half of the kingdom, te nyavasan, they lived. The Pandavas went to live there. Rajan, O king. O king means Vaishampayana is addressing King Janamejaya. So, O King Janamejaya, O Rajan, hey Rajan, O king, they lived there. For how long? Samvatsara ganan bahun. For many, many years. They lived there for many years. So when they arrived, it was a bunch of useless land, but the Pandavas, they're described in several places as having so much ojas, so much energy, so much power and wealth. What did they do? They employed their power and they employed their wealth wisely. What did they do? First of all, with their power, last line, kurvantaha, what did they did? What did they do? Kurvantaha anyan mahikshataha vashe. They brought anyan, other, mahikshataha, other kings, other rulers. What did they do? Vashe kurvantaha. They brought them under their own control. Means what? They conquered other kingdoms and brought those kingdoms and their rulers under their control. How did they do that? Shastra pratapena. Through their might in wielding weapons, they subjugated other kingdoms. So they had been pretty powerless when they were banished from the kingdom, and now they set out on a twofold strategy. One is they build their power by overcoming adjacent kingdoms. And then also they had wealth, and of course they gained more wealth through conquering the kingdoms. What did they do with that wealth? Sachakara sabham divyam, sachakara sabham, sarvaratna samachitan, sarvaratna tasyam duryodhano mando, tasyam duryodhano lobham chakre sudurmatihi, lobham chakre sudur. Saha chakara, they built. They, the Pandavas, chakara, they made what? A sabha. A sabha, literally hall, but here it means palace. They built a palace. Now remember, they came with wealth, and then they got the wealth of the kingdoms they conquered. So they're not going to build an ordinary palace. Remember this Saddam Hussein? This crazy guy who built all these amazing palaces. It's not a fair comparison, but he had access to ridiculous amounts of wealth, and then he employed that wealth in building these incredibly elaborate palaces. Well, the Pandavas are doing that here. So they built a sabham, they built a palace, not an ordinary palace, Divyam, a divine palace. Sarva Ratna Samachitan, filled or studded with Sarva Ratna, all kinds of gems, all kinds of jewels. They built this amazing palace. Then what happened? Duryodhana tasyam lobham chakre. Tasyam, for that palace, Duryodhana lobham chakre. He felt lobha. Number 4. So first he's dealing with enemy number 6, Matsarya. Now he's dealing with enemy number 4, Lobham Chakre. Duryodhana was overcome by greed, seeing this fabulous palace that his cousins, he couldn't stand them, number 6. Because of his jealousy, already he couldn't stand the Pandavas, and now in addition he sees their incredible palace, and what does he feel? Lobham Chakre. He feels incredible greed. And interesting that, remember, this is narrated by Vaishampayana, and occasionally Vaishampayana puts in his own editorial comments. Here he says, Duryodhana, who is Mandaha. Manda means dull-witted. So the dull-witted Duryodhana, not only dull-witted, sudurmatihi. Durmati is one whose mind doesn't work well. Is durmati, blockhead. Durmati means blockhead. The prefix su intensifies it. Not merely durmati, sudurmati, really a blockhead. This looks like editorial comments from Vaishampayana. He's not content merely to say Duryodhana got jealous, got greed, but also Duryodhana, the dull-witted Duryodhana, who's really a blockhead. He gained intense greed. And here we see more evidence of the Shad-adi, the 6 enemies, who is really Duryodhana's real enemy is not the Pandavas. Duryodhana's real enemy is within. And the same is true of each and every human being. The real enemy lies within us all. All right. Tatokshar vanshayatva cha, tatokshar vanshayatva, saubalena yudhishtaram, saubalena vanam prasthapaya, saptavarshani panchacha, saptavarshani. Tataha, thereafter, vanchayatva, having been cheated how? Akshaihi, by dice. Having been cheated in a dice game, and who is coordinating this dice game? Who's playing this dice game? Saubalena. Remember, Saubala is the son of Subala, Shakuni. So Shakuni, the backstory, most of you know quite well, is how to get the palace. So Duryodhana sees their wonderful palace, how to get the palace and how to get rid of the Pandavas. And what is the new scheme that is hatched is this crooked dice game conducted by Shakuni. So Shakuni conducts this dice game, and vanchayatva, having cheated the Pandavas, akshaihi, through this dice game, saubalena, conducted by Shakuni, And and who was cheated? Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira vanchayatva. Having cheated Yudhishthira at this dice game. And what a wonderful story. We'll see this much later when we're in the text. Yudhishthira was the most dharmic person on the planet. He's really represented. In fact, he's called Dharmaputra, the son of Dharma, because Dharma is also a name for Yama, who is the lord of Dharma, turned out to be his father. Remember, Kunti could invoke the gods to give birth to a son. She invokes Dharma Raja, the king of Dharma, that deity. She invokes him and she gives birth to Yudhishthira. Therefore, Yudhishthira is Dharmaputra, the son of Dharma, the most righteous person. And what a story. Even the most righteous person on the planet has a weak point. This is the glorious part of the story. The most righteous person on the planet is perfect or imperfect, like all human beings. Yes, he is the most righteous. By a long shot, he's the most righteous. No human being is perfect. And even Yudhishthira has a weak point in his personality. He apparently has a weakness for gambling. We call it a gambling problem. That's in modern times. He has a gambling problem. Some people have that. Yudhishthira had a gambling problem. We admit it. That's what the story is. In spite of his being a righteous person, he had a gambling problem. This is something we'll see as we continue to study. The Mahabharata, the story, is brilliant in showing great people having some weaknesses and showing terrible people having some good qualities. Because that's the reality of life. Life is not black and white. Life is complicated. And the story brilliantly shows the complexity of life, the complexity of people. Are you a very simple person? Or are you a little complicated? We're all at least a little complicated. Because that's how life is. No one is black or white. No one is all good or all evil. Every person is a complicated conjunction of all kinds of different factors. And we'll see that as we continue. So Yudhishthira, having been cheated by Shakuni at dice for the sake of gaining that palace, that Duryodhana had so much lobha, so much greed for that palace, so they schemed this dice game, and therefore Vanam prasthapayamasa. The Pandavas prasthapayamasa were exiled to the Vanam, to the forest. So now first they're kicked out of Hastinapura and made to live in Khandava Prastha. Then they're kicked out of Khandava Prastha and made to live in the forest. Vanam prasthapayamasa. Made to live in a forest for how long? Saptavarshani, 7 years. Panchacha plus 5. How's your math? 7 plus 5 is approximately 12. And agnatam hekam rashtre cha agnatam hekam rashtre tata varsham trayodasham tata varsham. In addition to the 12 years of exile in the forest, ekam, 1 year, agnatam, of living incognito, rashtre, in the kingdom, tata, also. Ekam varsham, 1 more year. After the 12, they had to live 1 year in hiding, in incognito, leading to a total of trayodasham, for a total of 13 years. Then, after the 13 years are over, Tatash-chaturdashe varshe, tatash-chaturdashe, yachamana swakam vasu, yachamana swakam. Na labhyanta maharaja, na labhyanta tato yuddham avartata, tato yuddham. Tataha, then, thereafter, Chaturdashe Varshe, in the 14th year. What happened to the 13 years? About a third of the Mahabharata is dedicated to what happens in the forest over those 13 years. And this summary just skips over that whole portion, because otherwise it won't be a summary. So, they live for 12 years in a forest. They live for one more year incognito. Fascinating stories, wonderful stories. We'll see some of that as we go into the details of the text. But now, Chaturdashe Varshe, at the beginning of the 14th year, what happened? Yachamanaha, they requested Swakam Vasu. They requested their own kingdom and wealth to be returned. So they fulfilled the requirements. Having lost the dice game, the deal was, nice American English, the deal was they would be exiled to the forest for 12 years plus 1 year incognito. So they fulfilled those requirements. And having fulfilled those requirements, they were supposed to come back and get their kingdom back. So they came back, Yachamanaha, and they requested Swakam Vasu, they requested their kingdom back, but na alabhyanta, they didn't get it back. Duryodhana just refused. Duryodhana refused, and Yudhishthira wasn't strong enough to stand up to his own son. Very complex story. So it was really Duryodhana's doing that the Pandavas not be given their kingdom back. But Duryodhana was the son. Father Yudhishthira was still on the throne, but Duryodhana had his way of manipulating his father Yudhishthira. So based on that, then Dhritarashtra, thank you. So Duryodhana manipulated his father Dhritarashtra, and the Pandavas were denied getting their kingdom back. Maharaja, O king, Vaishampayana continues to address King Janamejaya. And Tataha, thereafter, Yuddham Avartata. Yuddham, war, Avartata took place. There's a long build-up to the war, and then 18 horribly bloody days of battle, all of which are described in excruciating detail in the text. I mean, it's like describing blood and guts spilling out, that kind of detail, really jarring detail. Tataste sarvamutsadya, tataste sarvamut Hatva Duryodhanam Nripam, Hatva Duryodhanam Rajam Vidruta Bhuyishtam, Rajam Vidruta Bhuy Pratyapadyanta Pandavaha, Pratyapadyanta Pandava. So the war took place, 18 bloody days of battle. Then what happened at the last line? Pratyapadyanta Pandavaha. The Pandavas, Pratyavadyanta, they regained what? Rajyam, their kingdom. They regained their kingdom, which was Vidruta Bhuyishtam. It was mostly destroyed. Bhuyishta, mostly. Vidrutam, mostly destroyed. They regained their kingdom, which is mostly destroyed. Sarvam utsadya, utsadya, having destroyed sarvam, having destroyed all of the Kauravas, and hatva, having killed Duryodhanam Nripam, having killed Duryodhana, who's called here king. He was really prince, but he's referred to here as king. So having destroyed in the 18 days of battle, having killed all the Kauravas, having killed Duryodhana, they regained their kingdom, but in what condition? It was mostly destroyed. So in American English we talk about certain solutions being win-win. Both sides win. Well, war is lose-lose. Both sides lose. That's life. That's how it works. Negotiations can be win-win. Not always, but at least potentially. Negotiations can be a win-win situation, which means both parties get something. But if negotiations fail and war is the result, instead of win-win, it's lose-lose, which means even the victor suffers great loss. And that certainly is true in the Mahabharata. Evam he tat pura vrittam, evam he tat pura tesham haklishta karmanam, tesham haklishta bhedo raja vinashascha, bhedo raja vinashash, jayascha jayatam vara, jayascha jayatam vara. So, Vaishampayana concludes his summary to King Janamejaya. This ends chapter 55. And at the end of chapter 55, having concluded his one-chapter summary of the entire story of the Mahabharata, Vaishampayana concludes, Evam, thus, etat vrittam. Etat, this vrittam. This took place. Pura, long ago. This war took place long ago. For whom? Tesham, for them, for the Pandavas who were aklishta karmanam. We saw that same expression before, and it's a nice observation. Aklishta karmanam means those whose karmas are not bad, not causing. Aklishta means not causing affliction. What it means is those who had good karmas. The Pandavas were blessed. The family was blessed. And we discussed this. Remember the discussion? We observed that even this family, which had good karma, this family which was apparently blessed, look what they had to go through. Even though they were blessed, look what they had to go through. This is so important to observe, because one of the most common and saddest things we hear is when somebody says, somebody in a moment, someone who's going through some crisis or some tragedy, and they say, why is this happening to me? Why me? I find those two words are so sad when somebody says, why me? And so sad because those words reflect a kind of ignorance which multiplies their suffering manyfold. Already they're suffering. They're suffering because there's some tragedy, there's some crisis, somebody has died, there's some terrible problem. They're suffering. But to make matters worse, in the midst of the suffering, they say, why me? And by saying those two words, born of ignorance, they magnify their own suffering by the conclusion that this suffering shouldn't happen to me. It's a judgment. It's a wrong judgment. The fact is, and we discussed this in some detail, we'll just summarize that discussion. It was several classes ago, more than a month ago, we may not remember. But at that time, we pointed out that every single person, no matter how saintly you are, no matter how much good karma you have, no matter how good you are, always we have some papa karma in our lives, from past lives. Every single human being is born with some papa karma, and the papa karmas with which we're born guarantee that we will suffer in this life in ways that we didn't cause, that we don't deserve. Every person, remember this discussion? I said your good karmas guarantee. By the way, this is a nice way of putting it to remember the law of karma. The law of karma has two guarantees. The good karmas you're born with, first of all, the basis is we are all born with a combination of good and bad karmas. Point one. The good karmas we're born with guarantee, and I mean that, they guarantee we will all receive good things that we don't deserve based on our actions in this life. We are all born with good karmas, which guarantee we will receive good things that we don't deserve based on our actions in this life. And in exactly the same way, each and every one of us are born with papa karmas, which guarantee we will all undergo suffering that we don't deserve based on our actions in this life. We've got to get this in our heads, because this understanding of the doctrine of karma will remove that thought, why me? That thought that doubles or triples your suffering. Already you're suffering so much, and then why me? And you suffer so much more. If you get it, and you do get it, the next time something bad happens, you can ask, why not me? Why not me? Every other person is subject to suffering that they don't deserve based on their bad karmas. Am I so special that I should be excluded from that rule? That universal law of dharma should have one exception just for me. No. Why not me? Happens to everyone else. Why not me? Why should I be excluded? Why should I be so special? I'm not so special. Therefore, why not me? So this is that term, aklishta karmanam. In spite of the fact that the Pandavas had so much good karma, they, pardon me for the word, they went through hell in spite of their good karmas. And what did they go through? They went through the bheda, the conflict. They went through the raja vinasha. Man, they lost their kingdom. The kingdom was destroyed. And then finally, jayaha, they finally emerged victorious, but at what cost? Jayatam vara, O best of the hero, best of the victorious. He addresses King Janamejaya, O king, Jayatam vara, O best of the victorious. This is what the Pandavas went through. Etat vratam, this is what took place long ago to those Pandavas. In spite of their good karma, they suffered this bheda, this conflict. They suffered this raja vinasha, the destruction of their kingdom. They were also jayaha, they were also victorious, but at what cost? So in spite of their good karma, they suffered so much. And with this verse, chapter 55 comes to an end. This is a chapter in which Vaishampayana summarizes the entire story to King Janamejaya. And then when we meet next time, we'll see very briefly from chapter 56. And then we'll begin, I think we'll finish that quickly, and then start our more philosophical discussions will begin. We want to see a little bit of chapter 56. That will conclude our introduction, and then we'll begin to jump forward into more philosophical discussions, which is really the purpose of this class. All right, we'll see that next time. Some closing announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our program for children at 11 o'clock, our mindful awareness meditation at 5 p.m., and question and answer satsang with me at 6:15 p.m. The library will be open after class. And also a comment here. At the time of Arati, maybe it would be nice for us to reflect a little bit. You've all heard the terrible news about what happened in Paris last night. So more than 100 people were killed through terrorists. And, the suffering to the families and friends and the whole city is going to just be suffering so much as a result. So maybe we can have in our minds and hearts have their best interest in our minds and hearts as we say our prayers, our closing prayers and Arati today. Okay, we'll conclude. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.